Yeah, this is very popular, but I agree with you. The mother-son cult carried all around the world, Genesis 10 and 11. We see it reemerging in Revelation 17 and 18 for the mother of harlots. Well, with all, that is a little bit of our background, and hopefully we can visit with you more regularly now that we've become friends. But
Sure.
tell me what you think is going on with Israel and Iran and the power elite. What are they doing? Because I just interviewed Patrick Wood, and he has this article out. Iran, the goal was always economic reintegration. Excuse me. The goal was always economic reintegration, not containment. So. That's interesting that he sent me that yesterday when you sent me several bullet points. I think you guys might almost be on the same page without even knowing each other.
Well, there definitely is a concept, a program that the globalists have for the New World Order to have these regional economic trading blocs merging together and forming political unions like the European Union or the North American Union and so forth. And it could very well be, it certainly seems that there is a Middle East trade area. There are similar blocs being formed in the Middle East. Now, I'm not an expert on that. What the main thing that I've been focusing on is the fact that the Freemasons, who are probably the most important group of the occult that are driving and shaping the New World Order, they have always wanted to rebuild Solomon's temple, and they want the Jews to do that. They want the Jews to partner with them. And this has actually been written up in the New York Times. I can do screen share with you anytime you're interested, perhaps when we have some more time, and we can go through it in detail. But they met with the Jews and planned to form a lodge for the purpose of planning to rebuild Solomon's temple. And but the key thing is they wanted to control Israel so that Israel would not be an independent state in charge of their own destiny, because then it would be 100% Jewish. The Freemasons wanted to control it, and I believe the way that they figured out how to do this is to be in favor of the establishment of a Jewish national home, but not a Jewish government. And we know that Alfred Lord Milner was really the chairman of he was like the David Rockefeller of the British foreign policy establishment. He was the head of the establishment. He was the one charged by Cecil Rhodes with carrying out his vision to basically bring the whole world under the rule of the British Empire. And Rhodes wanted to recover the United States back into the fold of the UK. He wanted to control the Holy Land and the Euphrates River, and that's what they've set out to do. And what they've done is, did you know that? I'm sure you know from the Balfour Declaration that it says we are in favor of establishing a Jewish national home. Right?
Yes.
But has anyone ever defined that for you?
No.
And we know what it is because Arnold J. Toynbee was the British establishment historian right at that time. He was the director of research for the Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which was tied in with that whole Milner group in the UK foreign policy establishment. And he wrote in his illustrated history of the world that a Jewish national home means Jewish population without Jewish rule. And Lord Milner made a speech before the House of the Lords in 1923, just a year after the British Mandate of Palestine was approved by the League of Nations, saying, and I'd like to quote it to you. He says, and this is from the House of Lords website, so this is not made up or hearsay. I was a party to the Balfour Declaration. In fact, we know from Professor Carol Quigley, who examined all the secret papers and records of the Milner group, that Milner was the actual final draftsman of the Balfour Declaration. But here he's just saying he was a party to it, right? And then he goes on to say, my firm conviction is that you cannot have either an Arab government in Palestine or a Jewish government in Palestine, but that you must have in that country some neutral power which will keep the balance between the different races. He used the word races for Jews and Arabs. And which, without allowing any injury to be inflicted on the Arabs, will allow the Jews to also settle in the vacant spaces of their ancient home, as long as they provide, as they are willing to provide, the means of developing those districts and enabling them to support an adequate new incoming population. So he saw that the Arabs and the Jews were fighting each other. The Arabs didn't want a Jewish state. And so rather than being in favor of establishing a Jewish state that could just be independent and defend itself and so forth, he envisioned a neutral power. He used that word with a capital P to kind of keep the peace, keep the balance between the different races. So he always wanted the Jewish state to be dependent on the Anglo-American establishment, and that way he could control it and make sure that they would build the temple for the Freemasons. See,
I want to even show you. I was researching this while you were talking. Here is the website of the Grand Lodge of Ohio, King Solomon's Temple and Freemasonry, a framework for self-improvement. Okay, April 4th, 2023. They go all into it. I think I found that piece on the New York Times that you were talking about as well, but you got to be behind their paywall to see it.
Yeah,
I'll show.
Actually, if you check your email,
right
just a few minutes before we got on, I sent you an email. That's right. That's it. Yeah, that's it. I have I accessed that and got the whole article and so forth. And
what's interesting is I have some of this in my book, The Coming Religious Reich. You'll find you already know about this. You've already made reference to it, I think. I said Cecil Rhodes grasped the connection with the Roman Catholic Church, and this is how he conceived his answer for world peace. Quote, "The key of my idea discussed with you is a society copied from the Jesuits as to organization, an idea which will ultimately lead to the cessation of all wars and one language throughout the world. The only thing feasible to carry this idea out is a secret one, gradually absorbing the wealth of the world to be devoted to such an object. Fancy the charm to young America to share in a scheme to take government of the world, to take the government of the world," end quote. I write, one language, question mark. Headquarters building that looks like the Tower of Babel, question mark. A coincidence, comma. I think I'm talking about the European Union and the headquarters there over in Europe.
In Strasbourg, France.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And then, of course, you have the book by Carol Quigley, The Anglo-American Establishment.
Mm-hmm.
Carol Quigley recognized Cecil Rhodes' intentions and quoted Rhodes' vision, quote, "The extension of British rule throughout the world, the perfecting of a system of imagination from the United Kingdom and of a colonization of British subjects, of all lands, wherein the means of livelihood are attainable by energy, labor, and enterprise, the ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of a British empire, the consolidation of the whole empire, the inauguration of a system of colonial representation in the imperial parliament, which may tend to weld together, I should say, the disjointed members of the empire. And finally, the foundation so great of power as to hereafter render wars impossible and promote the best interest of humanity." And what's also interesting, as you know, John Ruskin, who influenced Cecil Rhodes, John Ruskin, before Hitler even came about, John Ruskin has a swastika, which is a Hindu occultic symbol. He has a swastika on his tomb. And of course, John Ruskin taught Cecil Rhodes, along with Sidney Webb of Sidney Webb of the Fabian Society, that gave birth to the Labor Party.
Right, and Rudyard Kipling, in one or more of his books, used that same swastika symbol. And so they chose. Ben Gurion is also a globalist. In 1962, they did They polled a bunch of people to say, what do you think the world's going to be like in 25 years from now? And he says, gradual democratization of the Soviet Union. So in other words, they're going to move closer to the middle, right? Thesis, antithesis,
yes,
synthesis, right? They're going to lose the communist totalitarianism add elements of free market, capitalism, like fascism, like China has been doing. And then in the U.S., he says the U.S. will become more like a welfare state with a planned economy. This is 1962. Western and Eastern Europe will become a federation of autonomous states having a socialist and democratic regime. He says all other continents will become united in a world alliance at whose disposal will be an international police force. All armies will be abolished and there will be no more wars. In Jerusalem, the United Nations will build a shrine of the prophets to serve the federated union of all continents. This will be the seat of the Supreme Court of mankind to settle all controversies among the federated continents as prophesied by Isaiah.
So they're pushing for basically like we have, is it in Dubai where you have the Catholic Church, the Jewish synagogue, and the Muslim temple, the three houses, if you will. They're kind of pushing for that in Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, I believe the Freemasonry is a very ecumenical movement. They're trying to unite all religions and say they're kind of all the same, except you can't say Jesus Christ is God. I guess that's the one exception, right? But so if you may recall, the Pope, John Paul something rather, in the mid-'80s, he invited people from all religions, shamans and Hindus and Muslims to celebrate their religions and kind of look forward to kind of uniting them all. They were
wearing their occultic garb, black magic, all of this stuff. John Paul II did all that. We have the pictures. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and so Israel has actually granted sovereignty of the holy sites in Jerusalem to the Vatican. That's been publicized in the newspaper.
Yes, it has.
Israeli reporters Joel Boehnerman and Barry Chamish have written documenting that and quoting the newspaper articles that reported on that.
Which is why we were watching to see if Cardinal Pizzaballa was going to end up being the Pope, because he's the cardinal over Israel. And we thought it was Pizzaballa. Is he going to end up being the Pope? And then they went with Pope Leo.
So I believe that the temple, see, the Freemasons are kind of tricking the Orthodox Jews into thinking they want to finance and help the Jews rebuild a Jewish temple. But I don't know. I kind of think they're going to co-opt it and make it kind of an ecumenical headquarters of the New World religion that they want to build. Karl Teichrieb talks a lot about that, uniting all the religions of the world.
And he's coming on my show next week, I think tomorrow or next week. So I want to bring that up with him. I'm glad to know you know Karl too.
Yeah.
So what do you think is going on with Israel? What do you think all of this October 7th and what's going on now and Trump and J.D. Vance kind of bullying Israel and Mark Levin's out saying, stop bullying Israel. What do you think is going on here from your research? I want to remind our audience, Ari is a Messianic Jew. So I want to remind our audience that's one reason why his worldview and perspective on this is so intriguing to me. But go ahead, Ari.
Yeah.
Ari.
No problem. A lot of people do that. But I want to just set the stage just a little bit, if I might, and see, remember the partition plans, the 1937 Peel Commission plan and the 1947 UN partition plan. See, in order to make the Israel dependent and always dependent on the West for arms and security, and to let the West, the globalists, control Israel, they wanted to carve Israel up into a small little patchwork of lands that they lived on to make it impossible to defend. They never wanted Israel to have from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, including all surrounding Jerusalem, because then they would be able to defend themselves. And so that's what the Peel Commission partition plan was all about. Gave the Jews 20% and the Arabs 70%. And then the UN partition plan was 55% for the Jews and 45% for the Arabs. And the Arabs said no to both plans, and then Britain pulled out of administering the mandate, and Israel declared independence. And by international law, by uti possidetis juris, and this has been written up in the Arizona Law Review by a couple of international law experts, Israel inherited the whole boundaries of the mandate from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. It never. Most Israelis, most people don't even know that. They think Israel's original boundaries were based on the UN partition plan, but the UN partition plan never took effect under international law because the UN General Assembly doesn't have any legislative powers. The only way a resolution from the assembly can become law is if both parties agree to it and sign it, but they didn't. Only the Security Council can make international law. So really the UN partition plan is just a footnote of history. It never got implemented. But this freaked out. My opinion is that this was alarming to the globalists because they were losing control of Israel. If Israel had control of the whole mandate, including Jerusalem, they could just tell the globalists to go fly a kite. We'll build our own temple, right? And so Jordan, all the Arab countries invaded Israel right away. And when Jordan annexed the West Bank and took control of Jerusalem, the UK immediately recognized it. The only two countries were UK and Pakistan, I believe. Nobody else recognized the Jordanian annexation. They thought it was illegal. And Egypt conquered Gaza, and the UN never demanded that Jordan withdraw from the West Bank and Jerusalem, and Egypt withdraw from Gaza. But they sure did when Syria invaded Lebanon in the 70s, and when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1991, the UN Security Council passed resolutions demanding that they withdraw, but not so with Israel, right? It makes you wonder what's going on there. Well, see, by Jordan carving up Israel and taking Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, and Egypt taking Gaza, the UK was able to get by war what they were unable to get by partition plan. They were able to carve up Israel, and they kept pressuring Israel in other ways to make Israel dependent on America, the Anglo-American establishment, the UN, the EU, by funding UNRWA to keep the Palestinian refugees of the war permanent refugees from generation after generation, which had never happened before in history, just as a permanent weapon to be used against Israel. Oh, we want the right to return to all of Israel, right? And then they pressured Israel into a two-state solution. And every time Israel was attacked, the West would intervene and demand that Israel call a ceasefire and stop fighting. And so the PLO could escape to Tunisia, and Hamas could, never be defeated. Israel has never been able to defeat the bad. So this is how the game is played. The globalists are intent on controlling Israel through wars, ceasefires, arming their enemies, and pressuring them into two-state solutions. By the way, the Arabs get most of their weapons from the Soviet Union, made in factories built by Ford Motor Company and other American corporations. Anthony Sutton, who worked at the Hoover Institution, he studied this intensively for 10 years. He wrote a 3-volume series documenting all the ways that Western corporations had transferred technology and built factories in the Soviet Union, and how they built tanks and armored personnel carriers and rocket launchers and everything and transferred them to the Arabs for use against Israel. He came up with the conclusion that 90 to 95% of the Soviet Union's military industrial complex was built by the West and our European allies, UK, France, Germany, other European countries. So anyway, bringing it back to the present, I believe that in order to build a new world order, all the pieces have to be placed to come together at the right time. The globalists are not quite ready to take the final leap toward the new world order. And I can go into that a little bit more.
So what do you think? What do you think, for the sake of time? We're going to have to get you back. But for the sake of time, what do you think that timeline is? Because we have Alice Bailey, the occultist, 70 years ago, whenever she wrote that thing, saying that the outline of the New World Order would come into, and we see the outline of it by 2025.
That's right. And then, but sometimes they're a little ahead of schedule.
Yes, they are.
In 1980, they thought Maitreya would be the new world leader.
That's the New Age Christ they were waiting on, the Maitreya.
Yeah, and then, but here's another date for you. H.G. Wells, in The Shape of Things to Come, wrote that the world government would finally take shape in 2059. So maybe there's a little time left. If you look at history in terms of thousands of years, you might say from the time God breathed the breath of life into Adam and Eve and began human history, the Talmud, I don't know where they came up with this, but they thought the first 2,000 years of human history would be a time of relative, chaos, just kind of everything just coming together kind of haphazardly. And then that's like from 6,000 BC to 4,000, from 4,000 BC to 2000 BC. Then from 2000, for the next 2,000 years to around the time of zero would be the time of law, like from Abraham to the destruction of the temple. That was the period of Israel and the law of Moses and that kind of thing, the history of Israel in the Bible. And then they said from 0 to 2000 would be the age of the Messiah. They actually said in the Talmud that they should be that the church age really is the messianic age, but they thought that Jesus wasn't the Messiah. They thought they missed it because they weren't righteous enough. They didn't merit the coming of the Messiah. So they didn't understand that the Messiah had to come first to fulfill his priestly function to reconcile man to God by offering himself as a sacrifice for sin. And then he'll come again to set up his kingdom as the ruler. But so if you count 2,000 years from the time when Jesus was crucified, say in 30, then that brings you to 2030. So that kind of makes sense that Agenda 2030 would be a good date to draw that 2,000-year period to an end. That would make 6,000 years of human history. And then the 1,000-year millennium would be kind of like a Sabbath day of the week of human history, right?
So you think we're right on the edge?
Well, that's one that I actually think, things can move quickly, especially when there's a war. You remember if you look at how things were in 1939 and how they were in 1945, just in the space of 6 years, the world completely changed. And the same thing could happen again. One thing that I think is an important piece is the idea of what John F. Kennedy announced to the UN, that he envisioned and what, as I read, Ben Gurion was in favor of. All the nations of the world need to still hand over their military arsenals to a UN peace force. Because think about it, how can you have a world government unless you control the world army? You cannot have these independent nations like China and Russia and the US, each with their own thousands of nuclear weapons, kind of getting angry at each other and starting war after war after war. No, in order to really dominate the world, you need to control all those weapons. And that was the plan in 1961. Freedom from War. It's a State Department publication. It's in that. John F. Kennedy announced it to the world in September 1961. So I believe that. I hate to say this, I hope I'm wrong, but I believe there will be a third world war that will be devastating enough that afterwards, after it's over, they'll have a conference, and just like Potsdam or Yalta or whatever, where they plan the next phase of human history, and they'll say, you know what, this war was so terrible, we all have agreed to just hand over our weapons to the United Nations because we want to just bring an end to war altogether. And then whoever controls the UN will control the world.
How do you think this fits in with Trump's peace board?
Well, I think the main thing that's going on with that is just they're giving Iran a haircut. In other words, Iran got too close to getting the 11 nukes that they even admitted to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, in negotiations. They had 430 pounds of 60% enriched uranium that would only take weeks to enrich it to 90% and have it ready to make into a nuclear bomb. And they have the Shahab 3 missile that is capable of launching it and hitting Israel. And in fact, they can even launch an EMP attack. You've had Peter Pry on many times, and they can even launch a EMP attack and take out our electrical grid. And it's hard to believe that Americans do not see Iran as an existential threat to the United States, because it truly is. And so, so that's one thing. Iran was getting too strong, and the globalists were just not ready yet to have the final war. Because I think you would agree that the Antichrist will make a peace treaty with Israel. It'll probably be to call a ceasefire after there's a war, and Israel has lost a lot of lives, and the Arabs have lost a lot of lives. And he'll be able to call a peace treaty. And then the Jews might even believe he's the Messiah, because the Messiah is supposed to usher in world peace, and he would have done it. And he's supposed to rebuild the temple, and there's the temple, right? And so, but when probably, I'm just kind of hypothesizing here, when he sets himself, in Thessalonians, when Paul talks about the man of sin setting himself in the temple and making himself out to be God, the Jews will probably realize that they've been lied to, and he's not the Messiah, and they'll refuse to worship him, and then that may bring about a final battle against Israel, where the New World Order just pulls out all the stops, and then that will usher in the return of Jesus to save Israel and establish his kingdom and totally destroy the Roman Empire. I mean, America is part of the reason America is not in Bible prophecy is because America is Rome. It's part of Rome. Cecil Rhodes wanted to reincorporate it into the British Empire, and he did.
Yeah, we just read from Carol Quigley and Cecil Rhodes talking about that, right? We're going to take back the United States and make it a part of Europe.
Well, and then we know how it happened too. The Council on Foreign Relations was established as a satellite group for the roundtable groups, for the main one in England, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And so, and then if you add to that the Federal Reserve System, which has shareholders, they're part of the Bank of International Settlements and part of the whole Bank of London and Deutsche Bank and all the European banks. And then our entry into World War I, our writing of the UN Charter, our building the UN headquarters here. I mean, we are totally on board.
The former Dick Morris. Dick Morris wrote about George W. Bush in his final days in office, shoves America up under the Stability Board, Economic Stability Board, dominated by Europe. Then you've got, of course, the International Monetary Fund, dominated by Europe. So there are so many ways in which we've already shoved ourselves up under Europe.
Right. But I want to emphasize Bible prophecy for a moment, and you've taught on this in going through Daniel and Revelation, that Daniel 2 talks about the stone not cut with human hands, that's Jesus, smashes the feet of iron mixed with clay and just brings down all of the world empires together. The Roman Empire, the Persian, the Medo-Persian, the Greek, and the Babylonian. And so what that means, since Jesus hasn't set up his kingdom yet, that means that Rome never fell. Rome, the Rome back in Jesus' day, of the time of the Caesars and the emperors, that was the first phase, which lasted to about 800 AD, and then Charlemagne inaugurated the second phase, which is the Holy Roman Empire. And then the third phase was inaugurated May 1st, 1776 by Adam Weishaupt when he founded the Bavarian Illuminati. And that is the present day Roman Empire, the New World Order that is going to rule the world, and that's going to have the mark of the beast and totally implement the cashless society. And
which is why I think, Revelation, the seven heads are seven mountains, seven heads, seven mountains, or seven kings. Five have fallen, one is, and one is to come. Five have fallen by the time John was writing. One was Rome at the time he was writing, and one is yet to come, a revived Roman Empire, meaning that those nations and their geographical area and their historical influence, all of that is still maintained, which is consistent with what you're saying. It's all still there.
That's right. In fact, Rome actually incorporates elements of all the previous ones.
Right.
If you look at the way the streets of Washington are laid out with the obelisk of the Washington Monument and the rotunda of the Capitol building, and is the way it's modeled after St. Petersburg in Rome, and it goes back to Isis and Osiris and all the Babylonian mystery religions. It's really all of human history rolled into one. In fact, I think Rome is the sixth empire that Israel has had to overcome. And so let me see if I can count these right. You've got Egypt and Assyria and Babylonia and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome. So Rome is the sixth. But if you divide Rome up into three parts, as I was saying, three phases, then you've got 666. That might be where the number of the mark of the beast comes from.